they talk about what I call technocratic communism in very euphemistic terms.
Welcome to the show that the fact checkers warned you about. The one that debunks the mainstream narrative and gives you high signal, actionable content that helps you navigate the cloud world. It's BombthrowerTV with your host, Mark Jeftovic.
Pleasure to have you on. I loved your book, which I had read a couple years ago, Unassailable, which really the second half was a little bit more technical guide, but the first half was really a history of kind of modern censorship on the internet. And I saw on Zero Hedge the other day you're writing on another book on a topic that I've yelled about quite a bit, so I was excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, well, it's great to get on the show with you. And I mean, we've known each other a number of years, so it's nice to catch up live. And yeah, Unassailable, I probably should do a second version of that just because the technology, this, what's coming to be called sovereign computing, right, is made leaps and bounds since I put out that book. Like a couple of shout outs. There's things like Ghost, there's Start9 operating system, and there's just more and more methods for people to take control over the technology. So everything you put in the cloud is becoming more of a personal cloud thing and becoming decentralized, and there's more options and more development. And it's still very much under the radar, but I'm looking forward to that gaining more momentum and gathering steam.
Hell yeah. So for today, as Biden's not showing up, but as the world leaders get together and they discuss what they're going to do to fight carbon, you wrote an article on Zero Hedge about carbon allowances. It's something that we've spoken about on this show with the capabilities of a central bank digital currency, what they might do to limit our carbon usage. So it's a serious topic. And to start it off, in your estimates, how many farts are we going to be allowed a year?
I don't know. It might be more of like if you're a member of the Liberal Party in Canada or the Democrats in the States, you might be allowed more farts than, MAGA voters. It's every time there's one of these COP conferences, and it's always worth noting that a lot of the attendees arrive on private jet and super yacht. And then I always wonder, like, what's going to get taken away this year, right? At COP 26, which I guess was 2 years ago, the big bullet points and takeaways were meat, right? Methane. It's like, oh, methane is worse than carbon, and cows are a big source of methane. It was cow farts were under the microscope then, not people farts yet. But I wrote a piece then too, because what was interesting is if you actually took a look at the menu from that conference, it was like grass-fed Wagyu, like the carbon footprint of the menu for the attendees was more than a month's worth of rations for the rest of us plebs. And that's how these people operate, with no sense of irony or self-awareness. They tool around, they pontificate from gold-plated thrones or solid gold thrones about wealth inequality and we're all in this together. And the rest of you, I always say it's everybody else. The rest of you are going to have to ratchet down your standard of living. So the piece that you're talking about that kind of went a little crazy this week, a travel agency out of England called Intrepid Travel, in conjunction with like a think tank called Future Lab, and they have an umbrella name. They put out a report. It came out actually early October, and they said that, the climate emergency was going to lead to a condition of like travel extinction, right? Was the thing, because, Bahamas would sink under the sea or something like that. And so there'd be places where climate change is so bad you can't even go. And then what would happen is governments would impose travel restrictions based on carbon passports in the future to limit people's travel, except theirs, of course. And I think they put the year 2040 on it. So I wrote it up. It was in the October Bitcoin Capitalist letter. I pulled out an excerpt. I put it on BombthrowerTV over the weekend, and it just went crazy, right? And because people are just coming off of the lockdown era. We've had 2 years. Like, if you and I would have been talking about this without COVID, without the pandemic,
Right.
without
People think we were
lockdown,
insane.
people would think we're like two randos out of 4chan, right? Like, listen to these guys. But now, like, everybody, a lot of people lined up for lockdowns. A lot of people said, yeah, this is the right thing. And they still believe it to this day, despite all the harms being coming out of in studies now. And the list goes on. We could rhyme them off all morning. But pretty well, even polite company knows the lockdowns did more damage than good. But people stood still for it. And during the lockdowns and beyond the lockdowns, people, these think tanks and these supranational organizations like the WEF and whoever, they've been saying the quiet part out loud, saying, wow, we really reduced carbon emissions during lockdowns, and maybe climate lockdowns will be next. That is quickly moving out of the conspiracy theory realm because, I mean, people are putting out white papers about it. And so this particular one, Future Labs, they kind of strike me as a wannabe World Economic Forum. And they talk about what I call technocratic communism in very euphemistic terms. They've got another report. I haven't finished reading it yet, called neo-collectivism. They think is going to be the big trend of the future. And it's just basically, a polite way to say technocratic communism.
So let's talk about the consequences of the system. So I guess the critical features that they would need in terms of infrastructure, either a central bank digital currency makes it very easy because then they get to see what you're consuming, how much carbon do they tie to your consumption, and then basically not letting you make specific purchases because you're over your allotment. So the infrastructure, if you have a central bank digital currency, is very easy. Or if they create some different mechanism for tracking your purchases, which it doesn't seem very easy without that aspect. I can understand how with modern technology, they could track us enough to execute on this. I'll hand it to you, though, to kind of let people know what the consequences of them telling you, hey, here's your carbon allotment. Like, what does life actually look like if they were to step in and do that?
Let's get to that, but let's get there by talking about CBDCs themselves as the natural rails for this kind of a system, right? Because for one thing, climate alarmism is bulldozing the middle class, right? It's a controlled demolition of the economy. And the reason why, why would leaders want to destroy their economy? Well, if the whole thing is based on debt, right? If the whole thing is based on an expanding debt bubble that can no longer be expanded, then somehow you have to let the air out of this bubble. And you have to try to do the unthinkable in modern economics, which is deflate. Like, deflation is death when you're using debt for money. So we've got this huge debt bubble. And in my mind, I always say the easiest way to understand debt is just its future value pulled into the present and consumed now, right? So we've pulled all this future value into the present and we've spent it. We've used it up. So how do you then get in front of this? Because we can't pull any more future value. Well, you have to get the rabble to tone down their standard of living, right? You have to get them to stop living beyond their means. And so
it's a forced austerity, but under the guise of saving the environment.
Exactly. And so, de-dollarization is a thing. Fiat debasement is a thing. So what do? Okay, in a way, and people kind of take me the wrong way when I say this, they're actually taking a playbook out of the sound money playbook by saying we're not going to back money by debt anymore, these symbolic tokens that denominate debt backed by nothing. We're going to back money with carbon carbon emissions, CO2 emissions, CO2 footprints. This is now the hard backing for your money. And the way to deliver it and to track it, because that's non-trivial, is through a central bank digital currency. And we all carry these things around with us. And so our entire lives are in here. Okay, well, that's where it's, our lives will be gamified into our phones. My only caveat around that is you can't call it money anymore, right? Because money is something that you can save. It's something that you can spend when you want, where you want, why you want, and all that goes away. So this isn't money anymore. It's not money backed by nothing. It is now a social credit score capped by your carbon emissions. So how pervasive will it be? Well, if you're living in a world where your business is on lockdown, your business is like shut down for whatever reason, right? If you're completely dependent on stimmies and emergency payments from the central bank to not starve to death, that just shows up on your phone every month, you're going to adhere to whatever rules they put on that system because you have no other choice. If you have no independent means of wealth, if you have no other assets outside of this system, then it's kind of a no-brainer. You have no choice but to comply. And there's a whole, unfortunately, class of people who are going to like it this way. The people, like, we all know them. They've got the right avatars and the right flags in their Twitter bios, and they're going to they're going to go along with this because we're all in this together. So there a certain portion of the population is going to be on side with this. They're going to be like the new lockdown enforcers, right? But there's going to be a lot of involuntary compliance, like people don't want to be in that system. And then there's going to be people who have means outside of that system. And this is where I do get a lot of pushback because I'm a Bitcoin guy. I love Bitcoin. I say Bitcoin is the anti-CBDC. Bitcoin is the antidote to all of this stuff. And people tell me, well, the governments are not going to allow Bitcoin. We can talk about that. We just covered a lot. I don't know if you want to go back over anything or just.
No. I liked where you were segueing with it, that the explain to me. So how, because I listen, I like Bitcoin, and I'm friends with Guy Swan. I've had the Bitcoin maxis on here, and I fully understand from a technological standpoint how this is the greatest solution for peacefully defunding government.
Mm-hmm.
But I do also wonder that, government's got some tricks up its sleeve and they like power. And so the idea that if it really challenged their power, that they would just lay over, take it, not either make it illegal, harder to use, or potentially hack the system or whatnot. So give us your case for how, this is going to successfully circumvent the CBDC.
Okay. So there's a few different inroads, into this conversation, but where I like to start is, the basic premise that the government is this all-powerful entity and a monolith, right?
Right.
The WEF controls the world. And what I tell people is that the WEF would like to control the world and the government would like to control the world. And I live in Canada, and I certainly know the liberal socialist coalition would love to control all of Canada. But governments are not all powerful entities. And what's going on in the world today, the actions of our governments do not point to an all powerful entity consolidating power. They point to sclerotic, disintegrating, slow moving behemoths that are completely out of their depth in the new decentralized, highly complex world. The governments today are linear, institutional, industrial age relics in a decentralized topology of networks. Right?
So just, I guess, you ever watch the show Venture Brothers?
No.
Okay. No. I can make it really simple. If tomorrow, let's just say out of the sky dropped watches that I could teleport myself to anywhere in the world, and we all receive these watches, that would be a technology that was so revolutionary. government would not be able to control it because it would have been given out too quickly for them to then go ahead and protect the airlines and the oil industry. Like, think about all the industries that would almost need government protection from that technology to go out of existence. So if one person created it in a lab, government might be able to get in the way of, it getting to people. But let's say someone managed to make that in a way that they were able to give it out so quickly that government was forced to embrace the technology because they had no choice. People were already using it. People already loved it. People's lives are already changed. The economy was already booming off of it. They'd have no choice. So I think that's kind of what you're saying, is that if you have a technology that's so good and is so efficient, then you can beat government because you are quick enough in terms of the distribution of it. Is that kind of the argument?
Pretty much. I mean, it's a bit more. It's not just outpacing the government. I mean, what I always say about the era we live in now and the government solutions to the problems we face in this era is they're just trying to implement linear extensions of the industrial era, right? So
Okay.
I always say they're trying to come up with faster horses in an age of cars, right?
Right.
And so they're never going to come up with a horse that's fast enough because they're still thinking in this top down, hierarchical, rigid infrastructure of central planning. It's like, let's just put a team of eggheads together that are going to whiteboard this whole thing out, figure it out, implement a bunch of policies, and reality will conform. And we're seeing over and over and over again in every avenue that that's not the way the world works, right? None of the lockdown models panned out. None of the vaccination models panned out. None of the interest rate models panned out. Like, they can't even get interest rates right. So are they going to micromanage the entire economy and like put a lid on Bitcoin? Bitcoin has a life of its own. If there was a time when the governments of the world could have stopped it, it's too late now. It's a legitimate constituency. And one of the other things I say about it is, like it, love it, hate it, big money has already decided that Bitcoin is a thing. So, I'm not a huge Larry Fink fan, but when BlackRock filed for the spot ETF, I basically declared victory and said Bitcoin has achieved victory. And in fact, I described it because Larry Fink was fond of using the phrase forcing behaviors. He said, I'm going to use my market weight because I'm the largest shareholder in every publicly traded corporation in the world. And we're going to use that influence to force behaviors into ESG, right? And he hated crypto and he hated Bitcoin. And what happened? BlackRock first started doing institutional custody for high net worth clients about a year and a half ago. And then they filed for the ETF. And I keep joking, like in the list, in the mailing list, who got their behaviors forced, right? BlackRock got their asses forced by Bitcoin, because I can tell you what probably happened is behind what we see publicly, some very large pools of capital and wealth and fiduciaries and pension funds and all of these places that to whom they entrust places like BlackRock. They said to them, we want to allocate to Bitcoin. And you're either going to give us a pathway to allocate to Bitcoin, or we're going to do whatever we have to do to find a pathway to Bitcoin. And at that point, I mean, you answer to your clients. I think the market forced BlackRock into Bitcoin. I know there's all these theories that they're trying to take it over. Yeah, okay, we can talk about those. But in the end, you're going to tell me that the world's wealthy, right? Like, not everybody is sitting on the board of directors of the WEF. There's a lot of wealth out there in the world. And you tell me that governments are going to go to them and say, we're coming up with a new money system. Your capital, your liquidity is all going to be locked up in electronic bonds and digital currencies that we can turn off anytime we want. We can devalue them anytime we want. We can put expiry dates on it when we want. We can limit how much meat you can consume with it. And you're basically living at our whim with all of this capital base that you've built over possibly generations. And I'll tell you what the people who are sitting on those large piles of capital are going to tell those governments and those banking systems is they're going to tell them to go fuck themselves. That is not happening. They would rather go out and buy an aircraft carrier completely equipped with nukes to say, this is not happening. You do whatever you want to your internal debt system or whatever. We are not putting our capital into that system. It is a non-issue and it's a non-starter. And for that, we actually benefit because that happens all across on a fractal level. So from the retail investor and the minnows who are actually the biggest sort of uptake in Bitcoin these days, everybody is saying that. So the governments, they may wish and want to put all capital under this CBDC system. It is simply not going to happen unless they think they have the power and the will to just enact a complete global 100% authoritarian dictatorship.
Well,
boots on the ground tomorrow.
Here's how I can see them selling it. One sale is just, hey, all of your government benefits are coming through this, which means that the world's poor, like even if like, let's just say your tax rebates coming through that. Let's just say just that alone. Yeah. And hey, you got to go get signed up. You got to put this on your phone. Your tax rebates coming through this. 80% of the like you're going to have your maybe 1% holdouts like me or you who go, hey, that's the trap. But then what happens when it's, hey, your healthcare credit's coming through this, or if you're on Social Security, your Medicare, your Medicaid, if all of a sudden all the benefits are coming through it. And I'll tell you another kicker is if they start saying, hey, any payments made through this currency, you're no longer responsible for keeping your own tax records. We're going to take our cut automatically. So in that sense, there's a massive efficiency and the ability for them to literally bribe you and go, listen, I know that this is a new technology, but if you want the equivalent of, let's just say $20,000 a year, here's how you get it.
Yeah.
Now, if we're right, I think if we're lucky, there'll be a two-part system where the central bank digital currency exists and that happens, but they don't actually outlaw cash and all the other usages. And maybe more and more people realize how inflationary the currency is. And so you do see people who are moving towards a Bitcoin or even building base layers off the Bitcoin. But I certainly see how government has enough incentive tools and how even like the natural technological progression towards digital currency, like I see how I just kind of see how it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And you're right. And that's exactly how it's probably going to play out. And a lot of people are going to go along with it. And that's why my solution almost sounds glib, which is like, don't be reliant on government entitlements. Right. If you don't want to be completely beholden to this system. Now, where I run into debate, or we might run into debate, is people say, well, they aren't going to allow the other system to exist. They're not going to let you go to the grocery store and use these non-CBDC forms.
You see, that's where I just to agree with where you're going. It's what's it? Say's law. The good currency will drive out bad currency. Or is that
I think it's Gresham's law.
Gresham's law.
Yeah, unless I have it backwards, actually.
No, you're right. You're right.
Gresham's bad currency drives out the good. Sorry.
Yes. So my guess is that like if there's a second option for a different currency, it will probably be preferred. And so I think as long as government doesn't outright ban alternative currency, even cash, it will continue to exist and it will probably be the preferred currency.
Yeah. And people are like, well, they'll just ban alternative forms of cash. And that brings me back to the large entities.
Sorry, I guess I am interrupting you here, but if you just think about the concept of a black market and how much money exists currently in the black market.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that if I want to get meat over my quota, like just think about how much demand there will be for black market goods if they actually went through with this. And then you can think of currencies basically built off the guaranteed redeemability. That's part of what gives the US dollar its value, is the fact that I can pay my taxes in it. If there was a black market for being over, just, you're not even talking about drugs, alcohol, prostitution, gambling.
I just want another hamburger, man.
Yeah, I just want another hamburger. And then you can see, the alternative currency is going to do very well.
Yeah. And then again, you go back to the large corporate and wealth capital bases that would just say, that have the standing and the clout to say to the government, if people want to pay us in Bitcoin, we're going to take it, and there's nothing you can do about it. Right.
Right. So let's, this is a bit of a segue, but I was reading your article about digital wallets, and I've seen, I recently, I've talked about this on the show before, but I was reading Safadon. I always mess up his name. Safadon. Yeah. I was reading his more recent book, which was the fiat standard.
Yeah. Bitcoin standard first, fiat standard second. Yeah.
So when I read the Bitcoin standard, I was like, oh my God, Bitcoin's the greatest thing that ever happened. I was all about it. And then I read the fiat standard, and I'd love, hopefully I'll have him on the show one day. And I didn't read that recently, but I came away with a more negative picture of Bitcoin, because what he was describing in the long-term usage was Bitcoin almost being the base layer for transactions to then happen. One, for it to be the base layer, and two, for transactions to kind of start happening on other networks, kind of on top of Bitcoin as the base layer. But the other part that sounded kind of negative to me, just in my understanding of human psychology, is that you're also talking about a structure that included a lot of fees, and everyone kind of likes things that are free. So I was reading a little bit of your piece on and what I'm describing is a little bit of like the Bitcoin Cash argument, which is, if Bitcoin was supposed to come in and really be a new revolutionary technology, the fact that it's kind of slow, the technology doesn't seem to be there that I can just, the pizza problem. I can't walk into most stores and just easily pay Bitcoin. I'm a Bitcoin fan, and I still have my money on the exchanges because I'm lazy and I don't want to deal with the wallet. I lose things all the time. I understand. But the problem is, if I'm reserved about this, the point I'm trying to make is converting your average mom and pop into the system.
Yeah.
You got to make things free and easy. That's the way. People like the back end cost. People are stupid. We're all on the internet. We're giving away all of our data for free all the time. And you can convince all of us, hey, you're a dumbass for being on Tinder, but hey, I got laid last week. We're all, you see what I'm saying? Like, we're dumbasses. And Bitcoin kind of relies on almost an aspect of human intelligence, of wanting to, you know what I mean? Being forward looking and going, hey, I want to get out of the government system. I want to build my own ability to have my capital in my hand, be able to travel with it. To me, there's still some technological friction that no one's created. And I'm stealing from your article now, the iPhone of Bitcoin now, which just makes it easy and readily accessible. So I hand it back to you to maybe kind of explain some of the tech developments that might be coming that will, revolutionize the industry.
Yeah. I mean, I had a friend in the late 90s when we were sort of like tooling around and looking at this new thing called the World Wide Web. And was showing me like a Mosaic browser. He's like, hey, check this out. Right. And he said, we're very much in the Edison stage of this story called the internet. And I think we're still very early. I mean, think about it. Bitcoin's been around like, what is it? 13 years, 14 years, like since 2000, like, we are so early in this story still. And you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, I was actually like, I had to do something in cold storage the other night and I was terrified. It's like, I'm like, oh my God. And like, I knew what I was doing and testing and all this stuff. And it was still like, yeah, we are a long way away from being able to like have everybody's mom and pop using it. But we're also making great strides. Like, I go to a conference and I buy a t-shirt using Lightning, and it's it's literally magic internet money. Like, the guy just showed, here you go. And I just, scan the QR code and it happens instantly and it's done. And that is, like, I tell people a few years ago, I was saying, look, people have to self-custody. They have to own their own keys, but they want PayPal. Like, that's the world we live in. And that's the tension that we have to solve going forward. And I think we're starting to get there. And I think that's why you're going to see a lot of the innovation on the layer 2, right? The Lightning and things like it. And
I think you're 100% right of it's like a PayPal. Because if you gave me the equivalent of a Venmo on my phone and I had to convert X amount to Bitcoin, I guess here's the only problem that you have, and maybe it gets fixed. You still have a little bit of a volatility problem in terms of, for like, most of us still think in terms of dollars, and you're converting kind of your Bitcoin $2 in order to make a payment.
Yeah.
you still have like, and that sometimes it's just a mental problem. But if you get to a point where Bitcoin's gone a long enough period of time, and it doesn't need to have drastic upwards movements to excite people as much as if it hit a threshold that people knew it wasn't coming down from. I
Yeah.
think you'd have more people who are just like, I'd rather hold the chief, the core, sale to Bitcoin is, hey, government will always inflate and erode the value of your currency. This is a
Yeah.
fixed amount and it can't go down in value. The problem is that what we saw kind of in the last bubble was that it traded like other financial assets where people were getting all this free money and the speculators were just pouring it into Bitcoin. So you had to run from, let's say, I'm not even going to call it a natural level because you can't call it that, but let's say it floated around 25 or 30 and it ran all the way up to 60 based off of the speculators. The speculators treating it like a financial asset does ruin the ability of just having that feel good feeling, which is kind of the core value of it. Of, if I'm holding a Bitcoin, this is not going to go down in value. My dollar is going to go down in value. Everything else is going to erode its wealth. This will not. It almost needs to hit like some sort of a like critical mass of price stability where it's used more as currency and less as like a speculative asset, that people would be like, I'd rather hold my, like average people would go, I'd rather not convert in and out for transactions. I'd actually rather hold the Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly so. And I think we're seeing, I mean, I did say we're very early in this stage, and you see this,
Right.
this huge volatility, these waves. And I personally think that over time, like those waves are going to smooth out and those highs will go away. Those lows will go away. There will always be a band. If there's something to measure it against, like a fiat currency that still exists, it's always going to go up and down against it. But I think those waves will, as time goes on, those waves will sort of like extend and not be as extreme. The last run up, you're right. Everything was correlated. Like there was that mantra. It's all one trade.
Right.
And I mean, I like, it was Dimitri Kafinas, Hidden Forces guy, who coined the phrase financial nihilism. Right. And so it was like, yeah, it doesn't matter because they're printing money like crazy. And so that was actually a kind of a mild hyperinflation was what was happening, except it was happening in assets because people were like, they're printing this stuff out of thin air. They're literally pulling it out of their ass. Every dollar they pull out of their ass makes the dollar in my wallet worth a little less. And I'm going to just put it into whatever, anything, because everything is going up. You got, Dave Portnoy pulling stock symbols out of a Scrabble bag and making hay on it, right? That was financial nihilism. And for a while, it was all one trade. I think what we've seen over the last bear cycle, and the other thing, there was a Bitcoin halving, like right at the beginning of that COVID thing. It was almost like, holy moly, did the stars align on a run up. And there's another one coming up in April. But I think what we're starting to see this year is a little bit of divergence among asset classes. So people are kind of starting to go, if the stock market goes down for a few weeks, it's not like cryptos and commodities, and it doesn't all move together anymore. Things are starting to drift. There's still a lot of correlation, but everyone's still watching what is the Fed going to do with rates and things like that. But things are starting to drift closer to their own fundamental drivers, right? And the Bitcoin volatility will smooth out over time. I think what I look at is the total market cap of Bitcoin, and I compare it to the total market cap of bonds. And I realize that we are extremely, extremely early in this picture, because Bitcoin is still like, $500 billion, in bonds, depending on what you count, like call it 300 trillion of dead money walking. If just 1 or 2% starts saying, well, we want to be someplace other than these devaluing paper currency bonds, fixed income, it's going to really change the game on things like gold and silver and Bitcoin and even the rest of the cryptos. They're all just going to find another level, right? They're going to level up one more time. I mean, again, anyway.
There you go. All right, we covered quite a bit of ground. Before I let you go, why don't you plug wherever people can find you if you had any last thoughts you wanted to get out?
Sure. I mean, bombthrower.com is like my main blog and mailing list and stuff. If you sign up there, you get a copy of the Crypto Capitalist Manifesto, which I wrote like 3 years ago and probably should rewrite. But the new book, the CBDC Survival Guide, I'll send that out to everyone on the list when that's finally done. My premium letter is the bitcoincapitalist.com. And my day job is I run a web host domain company called EasyDNS. And we pride ourselves on not being cancel Karens. So, we're based out of Canada, and if you need a domain website, you want to be out of the clutches of the huge big tech platforms, we're a friendly place that has your back.
There you go. And just to give you a nice plug, I don't know, however anyone sees me, I don't have an easy time concentrating or reading. I'm an ADD person. You're a great writer. Everything's very interesting, and while the topics are dense, I'm telling everyone here, go check out the blog. It's an interesting and easy read. I never find myself spacing out or overwhelmed. So I really do plug it.
High praise. Thanks a lot, Robby.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll do it again down the line.
All right. Love to. Take care.
Later.